Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltiziak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we get you ready for the 2025 NFL Draft. That's right, folks, it's almost here. We're going to look at the needs of the Detroit Lions. We're going to talk about the quality of players coming out in this year's draft and discuss just who might be the right fits to join this gritty Detroit team. On top of that, we're going to discuss the NFL draft location expectations coming off that historic performance last year in the 3-1-3. That and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
This is James Williams, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today is Coach Jerry Angers, former Michigan High School Coach of the Year, as well as Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He is now the Scouting and Training Director for Bull Rush Sports. Coach, it's just about that time. It's good to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be here. Christmas is coming next Thursday, I believe.
Yeah, and I cannot wait to hear some of the information you've put together. I know you've done a really deep dive on this, and we are looking forward to hearing some of those numbers, some of those stats, and a lot of those observations. And joining me in that quest is James Cook, senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle. He was also named Sports Writer of the Year for Community Newspaper Holdings. James, we're happy to have you here with us.
Good to be here.
All right, folks, quick announcement. We're actually doing video now, and I know if you're watching, you can tell that, but many of you listen to us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and other streaming platforms, so we're just letting you know, if you prefer a video option, we are now attempting that endeavor as well, so take a look. You can find those episodes on YouTube. Okay, guys, let's start with the draft location. Detroit, last year, record numbers. This year, the draft is being held in the Midwest, but on the other side of the lake, over in Green Bay. Now, James, you were there day one, day two. Coach, you were there day one, day two, day three, and I was there day three last year in Detroit. So let's talk about that. Detroit had 775,000 people there last year. They beat Nashville's record of 600,000 back in 2019. Now, going back a little bit, last couple of years, Kansas City and Vegas, they had 312,000, 300,000, the 2 years before that. So let's talk about this. What are you expecting? James, let's start with you on this Green Bay thing. You've been to Green Bay a time or two for a game, so you know the layout of Lambeau and what it's like there. What are you expecting?
I don't think it'll be nearly as well attended as Detroit or some of the other previous ones. The city of Green Bay just doesn't have as much infrastructure for hosting an event that large. Not as many hotels, not all that kind of stuff. I just don't see people being able to handle that much. Some people would be staying in the towns around the area, like Appleton, all those kind of things. But I just don't see the attendance being nearly as high as it was this year. There are going to be more draft prospects at the draft this year. I think there's 17 confirmed already. There was only 13 last year for the draft in Detroit. But I think that doesn't go with the fans following them.
Okay. Well, that's actually a little surprising that there are more people that are going to be there as far as draft picks go. And you're right, though, that hotel infrastructure is nowhere near the same, of course. I mean, you were looking at like staying in Escanaba for a reasonable price, which was like an hour or two away from Green Bay. I don't remember the exact distance, but yeah. So it is going to be different. They don't have the facilities to house all the people in the same way Detroit, Nashville, Chicago, those places do. Coach, what are some of your expectations for this?
Yeah, I don't think they'll beat it either. I think the Detroit thing was they were starving. We were the state of Michigan was thinking Super Bowl, especially with the draft, the way that Detroit set it up. It was a phenomenal experience. And again, the location. You think about it. You got Ohio, you got Illinois, you got Indiana, then you got Wisconsin that, around the Great Lakes state. And it's kind of in that middle with all those NFL towns. And then but again, I don't, they don't have the room. Everybody knows that. I was trying to go there, trying to find a place to stay. And it was a trying to a point where I just couldn't find a place. So that's why I said, the Detroit one was just that much better. And I'm looking forward to I heard there's a draft party in Sutton's Bay that the NFL's running, and should be a good one. Lafayette, Coney Islands will be served. And anyways, and we'll go to Pittsburgh a year from now.
All right, I like that. And there might be some Viking fans turning out for this one because Green Bay being in the proximity there. I definitely owe a huge thank you to my daughter because we were not going to go to the draft, and she's like, "Can we go? Can we go?" And we made the day 3 happen because I couldn't get off of work that Friday or that Thursday or Friday, but got down there for that Saturday, and it was an awesome experience. So, all right, again, I'm expecting maybe 250, 300,000, maybe 300,000, kind of like what Vegas did before, like Kansas City. Do you guys have any guesses on expectations for numbers?
I think that's a pretty good guess. 300, 350 maybe. I would think that the draft is becoming more and more of a thing. So I think there'll be more than some of these other drafts. I think, like you said, the Lions one in Detroit last year was kind of an aberration, just because the city of Detroit was so starved for having a good team that everybody showed up. I ran into people I knew there, people from Traverse City, people from Central Lake, all over the place. I was just running into people that I knew. I just don't think that it will be able to hit that amount and come a couple 100,000 probably short of it.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens there. I know that's worth talking about a little bit, but I know there's a lot of other stuff people want to hear about. In our last episode, we talked about the previous drafts, and those help set the stage for what we're looking forward to. So, any final thoughts on the previous drafts under Brad Holmes? James, let's start with you.
Holmes has had 6 first-round picks in 4 years with the Lions. He has not missed on a single one of them, which people kind of say, oh, well, yeah, it's first-round picks. You shouldn't miss, but a lot of first-round picks miss. I mean, the percentage of hitting on a first-round pick is almost 50-50. It's surprisingly higher than I think people think it is. So to go 6 for 6 is just amazing. Obviously, a couple of those were pretty gimme picks, the guys like Sewell and Hutchinson. But some of those other ones, just nailing some of those, it's just been impressive in what he's been able to do.
Yeah, and as much as they were gimme picks, I mean, somebody else passed on Hutchinson, and somebody passed on Sewell. But you're right. And that is also interesting to remember that last year's draft and this year's draft, they're different than the previous ones, right? The Lions' record is much better now, and we don't have any of those picks from the Rams trade anymore. So we do have fewer early picks to use as trade ammunition. So I think that's something worth remembering as well. Coach, anything you wanted to weigh in on the final thoughts from the previous drafts?
No, I agree. I mean, he hits on and he hits on those first round picks, whether he's trading up or trading down. And then he finds a diamond in the rough in the later rounds. I mean, the fourth round, sixth round, we talked about those guys, but so I just think that he's always doing his homework, and I think he's got a phenomenal staff that's helping him prepare and get these guys on their board so they know who to take.
All right. Well, another thing to remember or look at is, last year, Terrion Arnold was the only starter out of that group, right? Is a rookie year starter. Now, it doesn't mean other people can't develop into a starter, but I'm wondering, could that be a similar thing with this year's group this year? Could we maybe just get one starter or two starters out of this? James, what are you seeing out of this potential here?
Yeah, I kind of think, aside from if injuries creeping up again, I'm like, where can a rookie start on this team? Guard maybe, defensive end maybe if they take one in the first round. Other than that, I mean, that's probably about it, really. I think there's really just not a whole lot of other jobs that are available. The rest of the Lions starting lineup is solid with guys who are pretty solidly there, not like, just a placeholder that could maybe lose his job.
Well, that's the thing, right? The roster is so much better than it was those first couple of years that there aren't as many immediate needs to replace. So, Coach, your thoughts? I mean, 1 to 2 starters out of this, 0 starters out of this. I mean, that would be pretty crazy, but it could happen.
Yeah, it's for sure. I mean, and you want to at least have one guy that's going to start out of it because we talked about the edge, and I guess that's one of the positions. The other thing too is we still have to get through camp, and through preseason to get into it. So hopefully what we do pick up is somebody that can step in and start. We're not going to have that plug and play starter, I think, out of this group, out of this draft, but I'm sure Holmes is going to get it to a point where if, push comes to shove, McNeil's not, when's he going to be back? Rodrigo, Barnes, I mean, stuff like that. So are we gonna fit those needs to get somebody in there that can at least, carry it until our for sure starters are back.
I like the way you phrase that. No plug and play starters, because you're expecting multiple contributors out of this. I mean, that's what you want out of every draft class, and guys that maybe aren't starting, but they're rotational. And there are some guys from the previous draft class, like Enos Rakestraw, that you think might take a step forward here.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, well, let's look at some of the positions we think the Lions need to target the most. Now, the ones we've kind of heard the most of are offensive line, defensive line, and maybe wide receiver. Those seem to be like the three spots we hear the most. And wide receiver, we talked about it a lot a year ago. And we were like, a lot of people were kind of like, okay, we have a deficiency here because Josh Reynolds is gone. Donovan Peoples-Jones isn't lighting the world on fire. What's going to happen here? Tim Patrick kind of saved that spot. Now, he is there, but there isn't a whole lot of other depth behind him. So that I do think is still a position that we can talk about. The Lions didn't draft anybody there last year. What other spots do you think might be spots of need, Coach?
Well, I mean, remaining starter need really is an edge. We've talked about that. Everybody's talked about it. So I think we really need to find an edge starter, possibly a plug and play guy for sure, even though we've signed some good guys back with Davenport, but I think that's one of it. And then, future needs, whether it's a guard tackle, we are, a center guard, somebody that can play guard and tackle. I know we have Glasgow that can play both interior spots, and then wide receiver. I agree. I think there's somebody we have to get in, whether it's a developmental guy or a guy that can fit in there and start making some plays. But to find that, one of the things I want to real quick, day two for the last 5 years is average 10, a little over 10 wide receivers taken on day two. So that we may see, one of those wideouts being taken in day two, a large, bigger, taller wideout in that situation. But I don't see any of that. I don't see that coming in the first round or early in the second.
All right, well, we'll break those rounds down in a minute, but that is an interesting stat about the number of wide receivers taken there. James, what do you think? Biggest need for 2025 or beyond? I know because you've got some stats here and some contract pieces of information.
Yeah, and I pretty much agree with Jerry. I mean, as far as the needs, it's edge rusher, guard, and wide receiver. I think are the three spots that kind of make the most sense in the first 3 rounds. But we know Brad Holmes will just draft the best player on his board, and unless that happens to somebody who's right there happens to fit a need or whatever, he's not going to reach to fill needs. But I think that this year's draft and next year's is going to be a lot of it. Maybe after the first round on, the first round may draft for that need and take an edge rusher, if there's somebody they like is there. But after that, I think they're just going to be drafting best player available and kind of rechurning the roster upward, because they're going to lose probably a decent number of guys in the next year or two. Probably DJ Reader, Anzalone's a free agent. Levi is going to be a free agent again after this year. Patrick's going to be another year older and a free agent. Amik Robertson will be a free agent and due for a big pay raise, I think. Davenport, Lopez, the defensive tackle they just signed, was to a 1-year deal. Cleve Raymond will be a free agent. Pascal. And then there's a couple other guys that are possible cap cuts because, they have that bottleneck of the salary cap in 2026. So some guys like Glasgow, Decker, maybe even Brock Wright could be guys that could be cap casualties just because they need money to re-sign some of their star players.
Well, and that's a great point is, okay, Brad Holmes has done a great job, but it doesn't mean he can stop doing the good job. It almost turns the pressure up more because he's done such a great job. He's got to keep doing that job to kind of keep the roster going. And, this isn't like baseball, right? In baseball, rosters they can often stay very, very cohesive from year to year. The fact that the Lions are bringing back so many starters from last year is really an incredible thing. And coach, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I know you brought this stat up before, and I didn't ask you to get it ready for this, but you've brought up before the average roster turnover on an NFL team. Do you have that stat handy?
Yeah, it was in the 40, I want to say 40 percentile, give or take. I know that the Lions are one of the only teams that stay above that on the retaining of players. So I think that's one of the things that you noticed, and I think that's the thing they're developing. That guys want to stay there, but they're also going to say, "You stay here, and we'll take care of you." So, but we definitely didn't change the number on that. It didn't go down, that's for sure.
It did not. And again, we're living in that window. And it's not like the Super Bowl potential playoff window. It's that window of, all right, we've been able to pay these guys that have done well, but now there's going to be more guys who are going to have to get paid. And at some point, unless the salary cap continues to keep going the way it is, it's going to be hard to do. So we're going to have to look at replacing some of those guys. Now, you guys, we brought up the offensive line. Let's look at that a minute. We know Zeitler's not back, so we really could use a guard, right? We haven't signed anybody. Mahogany could step in, but I almost want to say equally important to getting a guard is getting another tackle because Sewell and Decker stayed healthy last year. If one of those guys, I think Skipper played a game or two, but if one of those guys were to go down for a longer period of time, that seems like a vulnerability. And so I could argue you really kind of want to look at a tackle and a guard slash center combo because I know it's something they look at. Coach, what are your thoughts on something like that? Do you think they need to look at both areas on the offensive line?
Yeah, I think they can fill it again. We have some guys in camp too that we don't know about, guys that have
Yeah.
been there before, guys that have a shot. Menu, I think yeah, they're talking maybe move him to guard, but he's a massive tackle concept. That's a phenomenal athlete. So, and so we don't know exactly that could be something that they do in free agency or, a trade in a situation. But yeah, we're going to have to find that, there's two or three guys out there right now that have played five positions in college. Zabel's one of them. Yeah, and he played all the tackle, all the guard, and center spot. So I think the kid from Texas too, Banks. I think he was another one. So there's guys that we could take a shot at that they could say, hey, we can bring in and we can plug them in and go from there. So, but your left tackle, right tackle is we have two pretty good tackles in there, and we know Sewell can always go over to the left side, which is probably where he's going to end up someday, anyways, because protecting that line, but we don't know. So, yeah, it's to find that guy that can go across the line. That's why Glasgow is such a big part of our team because he can play both guards and center spot. And maybe we look at a guy that can possibly play tackle or guard. And again, we don't know what's in the building, what the Lions have belief in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Is there are some guys that have been drafted, and we got to see how much belief the coaching staff has in those guys for what roles could be filled. But from the outside looking in, James, what are your thoughts on that offensive line? And is it just we just need to draft a guard, or do you see a needed tackle, or what's your overall perception?
I wouldn't be surprised if they took a tackle at some point in the draft. In the middle rounds, there's a few guys that have a definite starter ability that'll be there in like the fourth, fifth rounds potentially. Guys that aren't going to step in and take a tackle job right away, but guys that in a year or two you can develop maybe into a starting tackle. There's the tackle from Texas, Cam Williams is maybe one of those guys. They also need to find a center probably eventually to replace Ragnow. There's a couple of other center types in that same part of the draft, kind of between like 4th and 6th round that could be guys that you can draft and develop in a year or two and be able to replace somebody. But in the offseason, things are looking pretty good with Ragnow as far as he says he's as healthy as he's ever been for the last couple of years. So that's good news. And they have a couple of guys in-house that I think a lot of people forget about too. They re-signed Awashika, of course, we've mentioned him a lot. But they re-signed Natane Muti, who's a guard, and is somebody who they liked last year before he got hurt. And then they had Jamarco Jones on the team too, who's a tackle who's got some NFL experience in there, and they re-signed to a futures deal this year. So they've got him there for competition at tackle as well. And he played, I think, in one game and looked pretty decent.
Oh, yeah. You could always see some more growth out of some of those players. And so, Coach, you wanted to ask me about tackles?
Well, just in the Gen Stat, the draft scores, I got 10 guys listed right now that have a green next to them, which means good, 75 to 89. So think about that. There's 10 tackles. And again, like I said, Zabel can play across the board. The kid from North Dakota State, and there's some other ones. Plus, there's a couple guard type guys that possibly can move out. So if you think about that, James had already alluded. Maybe later, you got 10 tackles that they're not going to get plunked off the board in probably the first 2 days. One or two of them may, and I'm sure the Lions have done their work, due diligence work, in their scouting reports, and probably have three or four of these guys. Two of them are athletic. Zabel is considered athletic, which he is, and so he could play both. And he had a great Senior Bowl. So yeah, I think that could be. James made a good point. I think that could be somebody we can get in the and later in the late in the second day or in the third day, and be able to plug in when he needs to be.
Okay. Well, let's jump over to the other side of the line real quick then.
Mhm.
Everyone's talking about edge, 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 edge. We're going to take an edge with our first pick. But can I throw another idea out there? DJ Reader is in the second year of a deal. Don't know if he's coming back the year after. Aleem McNeil, Coach, you already talked about this. We already know he's coming back late this year. Yeah, we signed Lopez, but you could argue. I mean, Levi Onwuzurike got re-signed on a 1-year deal, and so you could argue that defensive tackle might be almost as big of a need as defensive end, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of bringing Zadarius Smith back and putting him over there with Davenport. I don't know if that's going to happen. It's probably too costly, but I like the idea of getting a defensive tackle as well. And so I don't know, James, do you see that as a potential thing that the Lions could use a couple defensive linemen here? I mean, we heard Brad Holmes talk about it at the owners meeting, I believe.
Yeah, I definitely think that defensive tackle is in play in their first three picks. Because like you said, they're going to have to replace DJ Reader. They're either going to have to re-sign him and he's not cheap, or they're going to have to draft somebody and develop somebody to replace him. So I think that maybe the second option there is the more likely one given their cap situation.
Mhm.
And this is a pretty deep draft at defensive tackle, just as deep almost at defensive tackle as it is at defensive end. So if you got that need coming up, why not take advantage of the way this draft is going to fall for you? I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the first three picks, be a defensive end, a defensive tackle, and then either a wide receiver or a safety.
Yeah, I mean, you said that this draft is loaded with defensive line, which really works well where some of the Lions' needs. And so, Coach, you understand the techniques better than James and I do. You know the edge versus the nose tackle versus other interior defensive linemen. What are you seeing on this group? Does it make sense? James said he thinks the Lions could take 2 defensive linemen in the first 3 rounds. Is that a logical potential conclusion?
With the depth on that, again, what's going to happen above and below and stuff like that on picks is going to make a big difference. But we have 13 Gen Stat guys on edge rushers, 13 that are graded good. Okay, and of course Carter's graded off the board, and then the D tackle wise, there's 7, and then of course this like CJ West from IU, he's only graded an average score, but the kid can play. And I think he's there's a lot of where these are going to change in these things. So I'm sure the Lions have really looked at that. And you have some guys that can go interior, exterior, sort of like Levi,
Yeah.
until the injuries come and then they push. Levi's he going to be inside all the time? Yeah, but he's going to play that, DN. What's he going to do? Well, McNeil's out right now. Maybe Levi's job is he's going to take McNeil's spot. Maybe we're going to go 2 big tackles with Lopez. But I think James is right on that. I just believe, again, who is best on the board, on the Lions board, and how can they get to that guy? And I'll tell you another intriguing one, that Alexander kid from Toledo. He's had 10 plus visits, you guys. 10 plus. The kid from
Wow.
the D tackle from Toledo, I mean, I can go, I can go on name and Harmon. I mean, there's some great football players out there. So I think it's a good draft because what did we talk about? Our need is we may need an edge starter, and then we just need backup people. And there's some serious guys. There's out of those numbers, there's probably, I don't know, a lot of plug and play players in there. So
Well,
it
and that's
should
the
be a
thing.
good
If you get a defensive end at the end of the first round to rotate with Davenport, that
one.
could be great. If you get a defensive tackle who could rotate in the middle there with multiple players, that could be big. So this draft is really lining up to have a lot of players that the Lions need at certain positions or could use some more depth at. So those are the big ones. But
Mhm.
where else could the Lions maybe address in the draft? What other spots? James, what are some areas you think that, might catch some people off guard or just some things you've observed?
Yeah, I think later in the draft they'll look at some guys that have return ability. They want somebody behind Raymond and Dorsey that they were a great 1-2 punch as the returners last year, but then we saw when they got hurt, the return game was just non-existent. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a running back taken in like the sixth or seventh round who has some ability to return and play other special teams, as well as being like a fourth running back to compete with Craig Reynolds or Vaki if they don't consider Vaki to be a running back and maybe move him to safety or just have him be just special teams. So that's one position I could definitely see them taking.
Yeah, and I guess even after the first or second running back comes off the board, I've heard this is a pretty deep class with some running backs. There's a good number coming out there, Coach. So even though we look pretty solid and set up top, I mean, James brings up a good point with having a good return guy there potentially or a special teamer. What do you think on running back or any other spots that you might think the Lions might be looking to address?
The running back spot is extremely deep. Um, there's another 10 guys, that have grades of green or higher just in general. Here's the thing is Caleb Johnson, did you guys watch Iowa football at all this year? I mean, you probably saw a game or two and you probably said, man, that running back's pretty good. He's the 10th rated running back coming out, Caleb Johnson. And
Is
I'm
he
just
better
saying,
than their punter?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, just had to ask. I know their punter's pretty good.
Yeah, but anyways, I mean, so that's just another deep one, and I agree. I think that we do need a return guy, and some of these guys can splash,
Lions
and
like Iowa players.
yep, yeah, exactly right. So hopefully there's I won't push the center
Yeah.
guard guy that I'm training, but we'll leave that one alone.
Yeah. All right. Well, and they probably could use. We look pretty good at defensive back, but it never hurts to add another safety in the draft. I mean, if you look at our two starters, we need someone to replace Iffy, and we brought in some free agents, and we've got some guys that could maybe fill that role a little bit. But drafting a guy, middle to late rounds, I think might not be a bad idea. So, James, any other thoughts on some late round flyers?
No, I like the safety as well. Taking them in the middle late rounds. There's some pretty decent guys that'll be in there. One of the guys that they've brought in that I'm guessing Jerry will hit on with the visits is the Reed kid from Penn State, but he's probably like a third round pick, I think, or so. Wouldn't you say, Jerry?
Yeah, yeah,
There's a couple guys later. Hunter Wohlers from Wisconsin, who Big Ten fans would be familiar with. Late the draft, you could take a flyer on the Toledo safety, who kind of has some of the traits they look for in safeties, but is going to be kind of a guy that's not going to step in and play day one. Probably guess from the MAC, it's a bit of a jump to the NFL. So.
And that'll be kind of the key right there in general is some of these early picks, especially you're looking for are these guys that are going to be contributors now that might be that thing that gets you there to the playoffs and beyond, to finally maybe that final game? Or is it going to be someone that's going to be more of an impact guy throughout for a longer thing? So that'll be an interesting approach as well to watch because the defensive end is the only one that I have a strong understanding of. And coach, that is most really good defensive ends get drafted early. It's very rare to get a good defensive end late, but like a guard, you can get a good guard late. And so does that impact the Lions potentially taking a defensive end in that first round with those guys, being so loaded like that, coach?
Well, I think that if they have somebody as one of those defensive ends that is like we talked about, Brad Holmes is going to get the best player available that he believes in. If they have one of those D ends is just rock solid, he's going to trade up to get him. Okay, he can trade up. So I just that's my gut feeling with that. If one of those guys falls, Falcons is a good team to trade with. They only have 5 picks at number 15. I don't know if you guys know how the trade thing works out with if we could actually trade the Falcons 20 our first round, our second round, and our third round pick for their 15 pick to get the DN that we want, and we're still ahead in the point system. So I don't know if you guys know how that works,
The
but it's
first,
kind
the
of
second, and our third?
yeah, and we'd still be ahead because there's a point system that they do. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at
Oh,
that.
yeah, there is. But I would rather work out the deal we did with the Minnesota Vikings
Yeah.
to trade up for JMO, and we
Oh
barely
yeah,
gave up
yeah.
anything.
We don't. I'm just my point was I'm making that we can actually do it, and we're still going to be ahead in the point system or lose by
Okay.
20. So I mean that's the biggest thing with that. So I if there's a guy that Holmes and the Lions want, they're gonna go get him. But if maybe with the let's go back to the edge because we are talking about that because that's the biggest group. With the most bodies is maybe there's 4 or 5 of those guys that are first round grades. And then maybe there's 4 or 5 of those guys that the Lions are looking at going, he can play, he can play, he can play, he can play. So now maybe one's going to drop to maybe we're going to trade up early in the second round to get somebody like that. So
Yeah, it's going to be a real interesting thing because obviously it's going to depend how the draft board falls, as we talked about in our last episode. Things can change in a heartbeat. And so the Lions draft way back at 28. So let's talk about who are some guys the Lions might target in the first or second round at pick 28. I've looked at a couple other mock drafts, and Shamar Stewart, defensive end, Mike Green, defensive end, are a couple of guys that have been mocked to them. But then on CBS, those guys are gone way before the Lions even get a chance to get on the clock. Um, they actually took guard Tyler Booker out of Alabama, and that guy is a guy that's been rising up the charts a little bit, I believe, and's got a really good scouting report on him. Plus, a couple others have Donovan Jackson, offensive lineman from Ohio State. And so those are some guys that are getting names out there. James, what are some guys you're seeing that maybe that first round pick the Lions might target, and what position would you think it could be?
Yeah, well, obviously the edge guys that we've talked about, the couple of guards that we've talked about, I think are all would be in play. Maybe Nick Skirton might fall that low. I don't know that he's going to fall that low, but I think in the same mock that you mentioned that had Tyler Booker going to the Lions at 28, I think they had Skirton going to 27. So I think he would be a good fit for the Lions at defensive end. He's a little bit of a bigger defensive end, which the Lions like. Mike Green, I think, is slipping a little bit in some mocks because there's some questions, some personality and red flag things in his background that teams are bringing him in for visits to see if those things are anything that will affect his play in the NFL, Um, and but if he checks out, then I mean that would be a great pick there, right? I mean it would fit right into what they need and everything, but the some of those other red flags kind of got to be resolved.
Well, and Mike Green's a guy, I believe, coach, that the Lions had a combine interview with. You put
mhm,
together this amazing chart. I'm kind of cross referencing that.
mhm,
Coach,
mhm.
out of some of those edge guys, staying on the defense before we jump back over to the offensive line, who are the guys that you're liking that maybe might be there later in that first round, even if the
Well,
Lions have to trade up a few spots to get them?
yeah, James mentioned a couple, but that the Boston College kid, say his name.
You're talking about Donovan Izuruwaku?
Yeah, Donovan Izaraku.
Yeah.
He's a 6'2", 247. It doesn't really fit our bill that much on that. He played a lot of wide nine techniques. He was recruited to Boston College by Jeff Halfley, who's the D coordinator for the Packers. And the Packers don't even have him on his board. But he's an intriguing guy because he's played a lot of the NFL concept at Boston College. Green I'm going to go back to the Falcons. I think Kuiper's got Green going to the Falcons, and again, that's that 15th trade up pick that I keep talking about, but we're going to leave that one alone. Just saying. So you got him, and then uh, Mikhail Williams from Georgia. I mean, guys. There's so many guys out there. It's scary. I mean, it really is. I love. I mean, what was the one I just loved in his combine? London Jackson. Loved his
Yeah, Landon
combine.
Jackson from Arkansas.
Landon Jackson, sorry, yep, Landon Jackson. He may be a second round guy, but
Mhm.
he's a guy that I bet he's got some work. He's a little raw, but talk about Hutch's clone. I mean, those guys are just work ethics and nonstop. So, there's just we can go on and on with that. Sawyer, I think's a late round guy, but he'd be a great edge guy for us. Stop the run. So it's going to be fun to see how this turns out and who they actually have as their number one guy on the edge.
Yeah, and if we stay on the defensive line, since we're talking that, if we move inside, Derek Harmon, coach, that's a name you're familiar with. Oregon, what are your thoughts on that guy? Because that's a guy who's predicted to potentially go, in an area the Lions could actually maybe get.
Yeah, Harmon. He was a state guy. So I remember
Yeah,
when he went to Michigan State, I was pretty excited. I'm like, oh my God. Then when he transferred, I was like, oh, we just lost probably an All-American, but I can see why he left. But Oregon was probably a pretty good fit for him. But he's another one of those big, solid, thick um, motors always running. You don't see him take any downs off. And he's a guy that I think the Lions would like him to be in there. And is he potentially can play both outside inside. I mean that's to be seen. So, but there's a lot of those guys I already mentioned Alexander from Toledo, and that you see what happened with the kid from Toledo last year. He turned into be a pretty good corner. So there's just so many good pieces that. I'd love to see us. Anyone. We could probably name 12 guys right now, and on Thursday we're going to be going, yes. It won't be like, oh, because there's just so many of those guys out there.
yeah. Well, and Derek Harmon's the guy the Lions brought in on one of those top 30
Yes.
visits.
Yeah. Yeah. He was on the 30, and I think they interviewed him at the Senior Bowl. He may have been. And then, and let me touch base. There are some multiple visit guys too. Stewart, okay, from
Shamar
Michigan.
Stewart.
Jamar Stewart, he was a top 30 virtue, and he had multiple meetings, and then actually the other two were linebackers and a safety. But so, that may be an intriguing one. But again, he's also the Michigan guy, so he gets that extra visit because he can come in the local day.
Oh, that wasn't Shamar Stewart then. Shamar Stewart's from Texas
No, I'm
A&M.
sorry, Jose, Joshua Stewart, isn't it?
Josiah Stewart. Yeah.
Josiah, thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. James, what are you seeing on the defensive line there? Any other thoughts before we jump over to offense?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a good number of guys that I think is because this is such a deep class of defensive ends and defensive tackles this year. I think there's going to be a few more guys that slip in the draft, and you can get a gem maybe in the sixth round. One guy that's like a small college guy that I think has risen a little bit and is looking to be like a sixth round pick is a kid from Morgan State, Elijah Williams. And he's that big defensive end that the Lions like. He's almost 290. Uh,
Mhm.
so he's a huge defensive end, but he still had production with getting sacks. I think he had double-digit sacks last year. Obviously on a different level at Morgan State. But Holmes has gone that route before with guys like Broderick Martin, drafting guys from smaller colleges and then developing them.
All right. Well, any other thoughts on guys you're liking that maybe fit that first to second round draft pick for the defensive line? Otherwise, let's jump over to the offensive side because, depending on how the run goes, I mean, if there's a whole bunch of defensive line guys that go early, you might get one of the top offensive linemen, not the one or two, but like the third or fourth guy at the end of that first round, or depending how it falls, you could trade back and still get your guy. Who are some of those offensive linemen, coach, that you're liking as a good fit for the Lions? Again, the guys mentioned that have been mocked was Tyler Booker and Donovan Jackson, Alabama, Ohio State, a couple guys who have some good reputations out there.
Yeah, Booker was the one I believe could play both spots. I think that one was one of them, or it might have been the Texas one, but the Tate from Georgia Rutledge, he's another one. Again, he's athletic. He's got a green dot through Gen Stats, which is I kind of follow them pretty well because they know their stuff. So he's a good one. Then you also may be looking for the guy that can play guard and center also, but the interior guys, there's enough of them. The Slater, um, you know, uh, who was the other one? I think, the Dillinger from LSU, who's from Clarkston,
Oh,
led at Clarkston, Michigan. Dillinger's another one of those big ones that kind of pops out, that would fit that mold, the big mauler type guy. And so, and again, he's rated ninth, the ninth guard. I mean, think about that, guys. He's rated the ninth guard. So there's how far are those guys going to fall? So, and there's six green dots with two, and then the Fairchild kid from Georgia also. He's athletic. So basically, Rutledge and Fairchild were both, and I have another interior guy too that from Iowa, but we won't talk about him. He's not anybody's board yet.
all right, but maybe on the Lions board later.
I'm hoping. Oh boy,
You're hoping.
they'll get a good one there, and he can play both guards and center. So
All right. Well, other than James, I didn't get you to weigh in. Offensive line, offensive tackle, guard. Any spots here that would be an ideal fit for the Lions end of the first round or whatnot?
Well, the two Ohio State guys I think would be
yeah.
fits. Josh Simmons and Donovan Jackson.
Mhm.
But both of those guys I think are supposed to be early second round picks, kind of. So that they would both be fits if the Lions trade down, or if they trade back up from the late second round into the early part of the second, maybe. That they could be possible options. But I think that this year is maybe a little bit more likely that that Holmes doesn't trade up as much as aggressively as he has in the past, just because he's got to replace people. So I think he's gonna value having a certain number of picks at the end of the day, maybe more than getting just one guy.
And if it's so deep, moving back 5 spots could net
Yeah.
you an extra pick in like the third round or something, and then you're grabbing more of that high quality there early on.
Yeah, especially if like maybe one of the quarterbacks slips to the end of the first round, somebody wants to trade up from the second to get a quarterback to get that fifth year contract that a first round pick gets, that the rest of the players you draft get 4 years. So that's a valuable thing among quarterbacks. So we've seen teams trade up into the late first to take the best quarterback left on the board and get that one extra year of having a cheap quarterback.
Yes, for sure. Um, Guys, I've got some really good news. We are still smarter than AI. Okay. I looked online. I didn't do an AI draft, but I looked at an AI draft result somebody else did. Kid you not. They had the Lions in the first round taking a defensive back, saying the Lions fill a need at defensive back. That was their analysis and that was their pick. And I'm like, that is from left field. Do they know something nobody else seems to know? So we're still smarter than AI in some areas. Maybe not all of them, but at least when it comes to the draft, unless of course we get proven wrong here. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, no,
So
Maybe AI is just a year behind.
yeah. Well, they
yeah,
took it. The one AI saw we were taking one of the wide receivers that are drafted last year. So
brilliant.
kind of behind.
Well, then you guys, other than offensive line or defensive line, is there a spot you could see the Lions drafting with that first round pick at the end of the first?
I don't. I just don't. I just don't see him taking anything other than that one. Something where the hands in the dirt.
Yeah, that's kind of what I see too. Unless somebody that was projected to be a pick in the teens or something like that is shockingly there at 28 that shouldn't be there, and maybe Holmes is like, well, okay, this is the best player available. It's not a lineman, but it's the best player available. Then maybe he thinks about it. But I think, yeah, Holmes builds from the trenches. So first round is a good spot to not miss in the trenches. So I think that it's going to be offensive or defensive line, most likely.
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. I mean, especially when you look at like, okay, there's like one wide receiver above 6'1" in the that's projected. That's from Arizona, 6'4". He's going to go in the first 10 picks. Other than that, you don't have a tall wide receiver. I mean, there is out of Ohio State, 6'1", Emeka Egbuku. I may have gotten his name wrong. I'm not a big Ohio State fan. Did not follow them closely, but there isn't. It's not a deep wide receiver draft that you're like, oh wow, some of these guys could actually slip, and then you could get a guy that isn't supposed to be there. But I'm agreeing. The trenches. We know that's how they build the team, and that's exactly how I'm expecting them to continue to add to this. So, all right, well, let's move back. Well, James, you said you don't think the Lions are going to trade up for this one. You said because they want to grab some more picks. Coach, you said if the price is right, it could happen. And I think Brad Holmes has taught us one thing, which is we're not going to know until he gets there because he does that much a variety of things. So what do you think is more likely, trading back than trading up, guys? Or do you think it all depends?
It always all depends with Brad Holmes. I mean, how many of his picks, aside from like Sewell and Hutchinson, how many of those picks have you thought that's who the Lions were going to pick?
Well, I totally thought they were going to pick JMO. I did not. Obviously, I did not see that coming. Nobody did. I about fell off my couch when that pick happened. You're exactly right. James, you were in Detroit, and so were you, Coach, when Terry and Arnold got drafted, and you guys were part of that roar. And I mean, that's when you guys didn't see that coming, right?
Yeah, and that's that crowd that was there too was very educated on what was there and what the Lions' needs were. Because as soon as that changed from the Cowboys on the clock to the Lions on the clock, the Lions fans knew pretty much who that pick was going to be, guys. I think they put two and two together that Terry and Arnold had fell and fell right into the Lions' laps and hit the one need that they really had.
Yeah. Coach, anything to add to that?
No, and then they went too deep with that. So that was then they got another one. So yeah, I think he knows what he needs. He knows what the team needs. Everybody's saying they need an edge. So, but again, if that offensive lineman's going to fall to 28, I see him taking him because the edge is deep enough to go. And again, the trade would have to work out to where he wins and by the point system and which is it's kind of neat. I've been going through it. Yeah, it's kind of cool how it works out. So
Yeah, and like you said, nobody saw Rakestraw coming in the second round. It's like, oh well, they moved up and got Arnold, but now they're grabbing Rakestraw, and so it could go either way. And even though I do tend to think with James, a trade back is the safer pick, of course, because you're not putting more resources in, you're gaining more resources and getting to look at more players. We talked about this during the free agency period. Rather than paying somebody a ton of money for a free agent contract, you could package some picks like Coach is suggesting and move up, and then you could get an elite player on that rookie contract for a number of years. And so it's going to depend on how that board falls. But guys, if you had your choice, great defensive lineman, great offensive lineman there at the end of the first round. Obviously, I'm not putting names with it because that's probably what you need, though, to actually make the decision, right, is who is that player. Do you have a preference, Coach? He's speechless, James.
I'm speechless. Can you believe it? Yeah. I think the freaking defense, man. Defense wins championships. We have the offense, we have the guys. I think we have some guys in camp. I believe we have one or two of those guys that we had mentioned earlier that can fill a role. I think it's deep enough in the offensive line position to get one late, but to get that knockout splash DN guy. We talked about this last show. How many teams have two great edge rushers? And in the Lions case, how many have that can stop the run and get to the quarterback. And again, if that guy is there, and I'm gonna bring it up again, the guy who can change gears from a play action pass like Hutch, where he can stuff the run and then go, oh my God, it's a pass, and beat your guy to get to the quarterback. If that D end, if that edge is out there and Brad Holmes knows it, he's going to get that guy because the plug, that is our plug and play guy that we need. I think our offensive line is in pretty good shape. Again, we can get somebody later. So I would go with the edge guy, and that's that guy that can decipher a play between run and pass and get to the quarterback.
All right, well stated. James, are you echoing Coach? You have a similar opinion or a differing opinion?
Yeah, I pretty much say ditto. I think defense. If they had the chance and one of those defensive ends that they really covet is there, they're going to jump on that.
All right, well, I'm not going to vary too much. I'm going to say defensive end, or I will even go defensive tackle on this one. Because if you get another guy that could be an Aleem McNeil type to go in there, then you might not have that pressure coming from the opposite edge, but you could have it coming from the middle. And we know how important stopping the run is to this Lions team as well. So as much as I want that offensive line to be stout, I think you need the defense here. And James, you have brought this up multiple times. You can grab a quality guard in the second or third round of this draft, and maybe even another tackle later. So offensive tackle. So I'm wanting defensive line with that first pick. As I'm guessing, randomly 97.5% of all Lions fans are hoping happens. And I think most of them want defensive end. I'll take defensive end or defensive tackle for this one. All right. Top 30 visits. Coach, we got to get into this because Mike Payton dropped some information, just reminded us the top 30 visits from the last 2 years. Last year, the Lions signed Terrion Arnold, Sione Vaki, Enos Rakestraw, Giovanni Manu, and Nate Lynn. The year before, they had Branch, Laporta, Hooker, Antoine Green, and Adrian Martinez in. Martinez is no longer with the team, but he was signed with them at one point. So this year's group of top 30 visits, Coach, who are the guys that are jumping out to you? We
Well,
got a good
Zabel
number.
again, I'm going to bring him up. They brought
Who's
him
that?
in. Huh? The guard.
Zabel?
Yep.
Yep.
He was a top 30. Again, Sherman Stewart, who's just an athletic freak. Harmon. Those are, the one we haven't really talked about is the D tackle Williams from Ohio State. He was starting to climb up some boards and stuff, and they had him in for the 30. So that's kind of cool. When you look at it, and then of course the safety Sanker, and he's another top 30 and a formal. He had a combine formal as well as a top 30. So there's some guys there. Stewart again from Michigan. He's local, so if they brought him in for a top 30, I don't think that's right because they don't have to declare that top 30. Maybe they brought him in twice. So was he at the local day? I can't remember if he was at the local day or not.
I'm not sure.
No, I don't see him at the local day. So, yeah, so that's there's some good ones that the linebacker from Maryland, just
Ruben
guys like that.
Hippolyte.
You're kind of, huh?
Ruben
Yeah,
Hippolyte, a name I know
yeah,
well.
Hippolyte, and then so those are ones that kind of stick out for me, and kind of the ones that they probably interviewed at the combine, maybe at the Senior Bowl, and then plus with the top 30 when those guys come in. So that's why I kind of think they're still leaning edge because they brought Robinson from Alabama. We haven't even talked about him as an edge rusher. And it's another Alabama guy, you know what I'm saying? So, he may be that guy if they do jump on that O line, in the first round, they go get him in the second or in the third. So, it's just kind of neat to see that, and you've already brought up, I kind of compare every year to see who had the multi meetings, who had the 30, who did they talk to at the Senior Bowl, what smoke screen did he throw up to make everybody think he's going to go after that guy so that he can trade somewhere? Because it's they have their guys they want to lock in, and I think all these guys, and then the linebacker from Georgia's that Chambliss. he's another freaking good football player that, again, he's not popping out on all the, he's in a little bit, but so
Yeah.
it's
Well,
kind of cool. And
the
then
interesting
that
thing, Ruben
local
Hipple.
kid, the
Go
Tesla,
ahead.
the wide receiver. See, you did talked about big wide receivers. The kid from Arkansas, 6'4", guys. He
Yeah.
played at Hillsdale. Tesla Isaac. He played at Hillsdale, tore it up in that league, and then transferred to Arkansas and had a great year. And the reason he was not marked or picked up, guys, he played in a T formation offense in high school, and they used him as a running back. But I believe he's 6'3", 6'4",
Six
and
four. Yep.
6'4",
217 pounds.
and he's another good one because I've been looking at his stats compared to the kid I coached in high school who's playing at Bowling Green right now. So there's your 6'4" receiver you guys have been looking for, and he's basically local.
All right. Well, going back to Ruben Hippolyte, linebacker, he would be a very, very late round pick or even potentially an undrafted free agent type guy that they might bring in. So that's an interesting guy that they brought in because it shows that they're doing some depth work. You might want to look at some medicals on him as well because he did get injured a few times in college. But, we talked about this, James, with the kickoffs, right? They're loading up on tight ends and linebackers, and so that's a position group. We thought they had too many linebackers last year, and it seemed like we could never get enough on the field at once. So, all right, well, guys, who are some other guys that are standing out to you that might be mid to late round picks, regardless of position? We talked about wide receivers a little bit. Again, Coach, you brought up a few right there. A guy with some height, right? There's Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State who's 6'4". And so who's the guy from? Where is it? I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank on one of the players that I was thinking of. It'll probably come back to me here in a minute. Oh, Savion Williams from TCU. That's the guy I was thinking of. 6'4", great height right there. And he could be a late round pick. Like I think maybe a fourth round pick, maybe. I'm not sure. But that's a guy you could get a little bit later and could be a guy that isn't quite as late as Antoine Green, but maybe could bring something in. So, James, who are some mid-round picks? It can be wide receiver, can be a different position.
Yeah, and well, Pat Bryant from Illinois, I think, is one of those kind of mid-round wide receivers, like a third, fourth round guy who could be a guy that they look at. I like Danny Stutzman is a linebacker from Oklahoma, who is a guy I think they brought in for a visit, and he would be a good depth piece there. That's probably going to be available like fifth roundish, maybe late fourth, something like that. So there's plenty of good depth pieces. I mean, you guys know that I love doing these mock drafts on like the Pro Football Network, I think it is, that I do. And one guy that I keep taking in the seventh round over and over and over again is Trevor Etienne to get me that kick returner in the seventh round. His older brother's playing in the NFL, but Trevor looks more like to be a prototypical return guy and like pass catching back in the NFL.
Okay.
But that would get you, a backup running back and a return guy, and he's supposed to be there in the seventh round.
Okay. James, what have you been seeing early on with the Lions on those mock drafts?
I've been trading down a lot, to be
Okay.
honest. If I stay at 28, all the defensive ends I want are gone.
Okay.
So maybe Holmes trades up to get that defensive end. So a lot of times what I've been doing is trading back, picking up multiple other picks like in the second, third, fourth round, and then just drafting multiple guys on the line, offensive and defensive tackles, defensive ends. Some of the drafts that I do, I'll end up with like 10 picks and I'll take 3 edge players throughout the draft. Not
All right.
realistic or anything like that, but it's fun to do.
All right. Coach, any other insights? You've done so much deep dive into this. I don't want to like miss out on some key pieces of information that you want to share, like whether it's a certain player, a certain position, anything you want to get out there before we head over to our final thoughts.
Well, I think some of the things too is the draft is going to change a little bit. Dart is climbing up the board pretty good, so that's another quarterback. I just heard today that Derek Carr may be lost for the season because of his shoulder. I don't know if you guys heard that.
I've
So
heard
that's
that
another.
there's a lot of confusion over what availability he's going to have.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, that may be even though they had talked about the Saints taking Sanders, with that pick anyways. And then, of course, you're going to get some drafts up on the top. Maybe somebody wants to jump over the Giants so they can't get the quarterback, or they're going to get. So I think those are all going to, and I'm hoping those quarterbacks keep climbing up the board, because the more we can get in the top 27, the better. And and again, and then you look at what are these teams' needs? I mean, the teams above us, that are drafting above us, what are their needs? And there's a lot of them, like, you look at the Cardinals, they need a quarterback and linebacker. Does that matter to us? Falcons, edge, center, safety. The Ravens are just a guard. But my point is, you have all those different things what these guys are looking for some starters at. And a lot of them are the D line or the edge, the remaining pieces that they need. But you still have, some new coaches who are looking for players for their team, and not as much as the players that are already on the roster. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. But let's keep climbing quarterbacks, and actually a couple of receivers you can climb, and maybe a couple linebackers, and then we'll get the edge we need.
Well, I like the idea of being aware of who's right in front of us.
Yes.
I would love it if we made a trade with the Chargers and moved up to, I think, 22 and got right in front of the Green Bay Packers to get somebody that could just be that impactful, or maybe we just trade with the Packers again. That worked out well with Branch, didn't it?
Yeah.
So maybe do something like that. Well, all right. Some final thoughts here, and our final thoughts might be a little extended, more than normal, but I think the Lions are going to draft a wide receiver this year. I'm pretty certain of that one. We actually don't have that many on our roster right now. I mean, we pretty much know, you've got St. Brown, you've got JMO, you've got Raymond, you've got Tim Patrick. Those four guys are going to be on the roster once the season starts, right? But beyond that, we don't know. I mean, we had Isaiah Williams last year who made the team, but then when we had to move guys around, he got grabbed by another team. And so we really do need a little influx of some talent, whether we draft one and we bring in an undrafted free agent or two. We're going to see some guys there. We definitely need to bring a guy in that could be an X. I think that's going to happen for sure. And we've gone over some of those guys. Here's something we got to remember. James, actually, I think you've got a comment you want to make about Brad Holmes, and then I'm going to piggyback on that comment.
Yeah, kind of like something I said before a little bit too. If you set your heart on one guy, Brad Holmes ain't going to take that guy, probably. He's not going to take who you expect, especially after the first round. Everybody's like, oh, they're going to take this guy that I want in the second round. Probably not. Don't set your heart on the guys. He's going to take who he wants, and it's worked out well. So just let it go.
And there really is, I guess, the roadmap to Brad Holmes' draft strategy is you're going off-road. That's the roadmap, because just think about this from the historical perspective. We had David Montgomery recently signed as a free agent, and we were bringing back DeAndre Swift. And we used a very high draft pick on a running back, our first draft pick. And I mean, nobody saw that coming, especially because it wasn't Bijan Robinson. And that wasn't a position of weakness at that point. But it goes back to a game changer. And that's what they're looking for, the game changer, the culture fit, that type of player. And depends on how many guys they have with first round grades, how many people are, I don't know if we use the word gritty, but they're football players, right? And that's what they're after. That's what Laporta was, right? And that's what brought him in there. So you're right. Don't get your heart set on somebody unless, maybe there's a certain guy that you think just fits the Lions. You could do that. But yeah, that roadmap is he's going to go off road. And then later on, you're going to be like, oh, that was probably a pretty good path to take. So, Coach, some of your thoughts on that?
Oh, I totally agree. It was funny. I'm looking at the multiple meetings. He had two linebackers, Pooh Paul and Kobe King, who's the local, but multiple meetings. And again, that's that one where I totally agree. He's in what you said and what James said. He is going to draft what he believes is the best for his team. in that position, it doesn't matter. I don't think he'll take a quarterback. I don't think he'll go that far, but he, that's why I just see. And last year, James even brought it up. With the crowd last year, he went corner, which everybody said we have to have a corner. He went corner and corners, right? He got his and he traded for it. But I think it's going to be could be D end lineman, O line, or O line D end, and then D tackle, and then fill in the rest of it. But again, the guy that's on their board, and I wish I tell you, I researched as much as I could, guys, to find first round grades and just to find anything, from other teams. And man, there's just nothing out there. It's just, next gen stats has got the best numbers on there. And then I look at those guys that they brought in. So it's going to be fun. And we're going to be sad if he trades out of the first round because we got to wait till the second day before we get to figure out who we're picking.
Yeah, and again, it's that time of smoke screen, secrecy, all that.
Yeah.
Well, let's put it down on microphone here. What are your predictions, Coach? You started alluding to it, but how do you think the draft is going to go? What are some of your thoughts? James, let's start with you, and I'll let Coach kind of get his thinking on this.
I think it'll be defensive end, but I also am not going to be shocked at all if it's not. I can see the Lions if somebody's there that Holmes wants at a different position. He doesn't care what we think. He's going to take who he wants. And if there's another player there that he has rated higher, he's going to take that guy and then maybe re-sign Zadarius Smith, and then there's your defensive end. Zadarius Smith was at a Pistons game this week.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I believe, is he dating somebody that's from the Detroit area? An
he's
entertainer?
dating a woman rapper that's from
Yeah.
Detroit.
She's a big rapper.
So yeah, that could happen. So all right. So any other thoughts on the next couple rounds or anything you want to put down? Other than Etienne, you want Etienne, right?
Just somebody like that, a return guy.
Yeah.
And no, like you said, I think that their defensive tackle is definitely something that they will take too in the right spot if the right one's there. And I wouldn't be surprised if they take multiple edge guys just because it's such a deep draft. There's some ones in the middle rounds that are pretty intriguing picks that you could take and maybe long term work out pretty well. And if you don't take one in the first.
Okay. Coach, how about you?
You can still pressure the quarterback with a good D tackle. And, so that's the other thing. Here's the top 50, 48 and 49 are edge players. And it's the kid from Ohio State and Jackson from Arkansas. That's the 48 and 49th of the top 50 players. So that's how deep this draft is in that situation. And so, again, what happens above, how things jump around is going to determine how he's going to pick on that. But it'd be interesting. But I agree. I think you're going to see 2 D linemen taken somewhere in the draft. I think you'll have an offensive lineman. I think you'll have another backer, a wideout, and a safety. And then, like you guys said earlier, one starter, or if it's not a guy that can plug and play and start, which is the DN position, then it's going to be somebody to fill in the backup role. And for a year from now or whatever, could be the starter as we lose guys.
All right. Well, I've thought on this and I've had a hard time coming to a conclusion for a while, and then I guess it just comes back to the trenches for me. And it's not like it's not the skill position player type stuff that we've had in the past because we already have a lot of those. I'm gonna say in the first 3 rounds, the Lions are gonna take 2 defensive linemen and 1 offensive lineman. I'm starting to feel that. And in the 4th round, go wide receiver. It's kind of how I'm feeling on that. Maybe you flip-flop the 3rd and 4th round, but I think you see an upcoming need on that defensive line. And if it's that deep, I'm thinking you're going to, maybe it's an outside and inside guy. And then I'm thinking you're going to grab an offensive lineman early. And then later, yeah, James, I'm really starting to get on board with this another return type guy because you want to add another weapon in there and someone who's got some speed. And there's some guys, some speed out there. So that's definitely worth looking at. So that's what I'm going to settle on. And Hopefully I'm a little bit more right than I have been in the past on some of these. All right, Coach, any last words before we get out of here?
Nope, just looking forward to a week from Thursday.
All right, James, how about you?
Ditto.
All right, I'm going to third those emotions, guys, and say, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Please tell your family and friends about this show. Find us on social media. Follow us on there as well as all major streaming platforms. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reviews. Check out more episodes at notthesameoldlions.com. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.